He who loves purity of heart and has grace on his lips, the king will be his friend. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together from Proverbs chapter 22, verse 11. One of the consequences of being pure of heart and of speaking graciously, people will find you attractive. And particularly the king wants people around him who will grace his kingdom. Therefore, he is looking for those who are pure of heart, whom he can trust, whom he can rely upon, who won't be scheming to undermine him. People who, when they speak, will speak in a way that brings credit and honour to his kingdom. And not just the king, but anyone who has authority over others, whether in business or in government. For we all know what a bitter taste it brings to our mouth when we find that someone who has been given responsibility in the community turns out to be a wicked person. It is for this reason that public servants generally are people of high integrity, people of commitment. But, of course, there are always exceptions. Now, if this applies on the natural scene, it also applies in the spiritual scene. For the Lord is looking for those who are of pure heart and speak with grace on their lips. What does it mean to have a pure heart? There's many scriptures that talk about the wickedness of our heart. The heart of man is desperately wicked, Jeremiah said. Who can know it? And David, who was a man after God's own heart, nevertheless had to pray, "Cleanse my heart, O Lord," because even his heart was tainted with sin, was tainted with lust, it was tainted with pride and arrogance. To think that he could take another man's wife and then murder that man to cover up his sin and to get away with it. But the Lord knew. The Lord wants a pure heart. Create in me a pure heart, O Lord. You do not desire sacrifice, or else I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise. As God's people, purity is something that we should be striving after. We can all recognize dirt and evil when we see it in others. We recognize it in a person's behaviour. As the Lord Jesus said, "A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good. An evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil. For out of the abundance of his heart his mouth speaks." Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. These people draw near to me with their mouth, and honour me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. The things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. It's not what we eat that matters, but what comes out of our lips, because what comes out of our lips comes out of our heart. The purity of the Lord Jesus was recognized because of the gracious words that proceeded out of his mouth. There's always something corrupt that's going to come out of our mouths, because our hearts are essentially evil. James noted, "You don't get fresh water and salty water out of the same spring." We do get that mixture out of our mouths. Therefore, David had to pray, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit in me, and then I will teach transgressors your way." If you have a pure heart, then you are thinking good. If you have an impure heart, then you are thinking to your own advantage, and your words are not words of grace. When we think of the 10 Commandments, yes, we know that murdering is bad. We know that thieving is not good. We'll acknowledge that adultery is not good. But the 10th commandment was, "Thou shalt not covet." covet your neighbour's house, your neighbour's wife, your neighbour's goods, because coveting comes from an impure heart. You are looking at what other people have, not to bless them, but to get it for yourself. It's not wise to compare yourself with somebody else, Paul tells us. But we justify ourselves by saying, well, I'm not as bad as the next person, or I do better than so-and-so. We do not do better than the Lord Jesus. And so we do have an impure heart. We need to have sincere love and a sincere heart. And that only comes about when the Spirit of God comes and begins to take control of our thinking. For these things are of God and not from ourselves. The heart of man is desperately wicked. That's our natural heart. But God can change our heart. Come into my heart, Lord Jesus. Come in today. Come in to stay. Come into my heart, Lord Jesus. That is, Jesus comes into the control room, the powerhouse of your life. And when you invite him in, then he makes some changes, because this is the centre of your being. And he'll come in to make some changes, to get rid of the rubbish, and to focus on what our heart should be. Therefore, there's a strong emphasis in the New Testament on the fact that when a person becomes a believer, they become a new creature, that they have a new way of thinking. Now, it's not automatic, it's something that we must cooperate with, for we're under new management. But if we don't allow ourselves to be managed by the new management, then nothing changes. For we have to do the things that he says. It's like when you're going to the doctor. For a long time you might say, well, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm not going. But eventually you might concede, okay, I'll go to the doctor and see what he says. Now, the doctor will diagnose you, and he will say, well, we need to change this. We need to change your diet. You need to maybe take some medicine. But unless we actually take the advice, follow the instructions, we will not be helped. And it comes down to us. God has all the wisdom to direct us, but unless we do what he says, then it's pointless. So Jesus, in frustration, said, why do you call me Lord and do not do the things that I say? Because he has designed a pattern and plan for our life. It's a journey which takes us through a whole host of experiences, some of which will be very pleasant, some of which will be not very pleasant, but they are all for our good, for our learning, for our training in righteousness. But if we don't learn from them, if we don't rejoice in the Lord along the way, then indeed they may end up being very bitter for us. So he who loves purity of heart. We need a pure heart, but it needs to be the desire of our heart, has grace on his lips, because what comes out of the mouth comes out of the heart. And the only way to be pure of heart and to love purity of heart is to focus on those things that are pure. If you fill your life with impure thoughts, then your heart will be impure. So we need to set a guard on our eyes and our ears so that we keep the filth out as best as we can. Now we must walk through this world, and this world is full of evil, which means that we must continually be washed. And we are washed by speaking to the Lord Jesus. If we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sin. And in this case, the sin is not just the action, but it is that evil thought which corrupts our thinking. But as soon as we discern it, we must confess it and reject it, that our heart might keep pure and clean. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Those who have a pure heart are vessels ready for the Master's service. And he who loves purity of heart and has grace on his lips, the King will be his friend.